Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
As we hit our stride here in the summer of 2017, it does seem to be getting a bit late, though, in the day, so to speak, when it comes to continued economic expansion. Just how much longer will this string of new jobs, relocation, and additional capital investment last? Well, it could surprise us all. I am Chris William. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy for over 25 years now. So we'll measure our contemporary situation in a moment with our panel. And later, where is he now? At the turn of the century, the Palmetto State's chief executive was a Dem. In a moment, the Honorable Jim Hodges joins us again. Please stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Aaron Nelson of the Chapel Hill-Carrboro Chamber of Commerce, Mark L. Williams from Strategic Development Group, and special guest, the Honorable Jim Hodges, former South Carolina governor and senior counsel with the McGuire Woods Law Firm.
Well, happy summer. Welcome to our program. Mark, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be.
Aaron, welcome from Chapel Hill. Good to have you both here. So, we talked a little bit at the top of the show that, it's getting pretty late in the day with this economic expansion. The Carolinas, I would say South Carolina maybe during this cycle more than North Carolina, but still the region has really had some big economic development wins over the last 8 or 10 years. Aaron, are we at some point going to reset in this cycle, or we got more momentum to go?
Well, I'm sure at some point we'll reset in this cycle, but I don't see it anytime soon. In North Carolina in particular, we were driving with the brakes on for the last couple of years. We had done HB2, and that sort of slowed, and a lot of demand was pent up. And now that that issue has been resolved, we've seen an incredible amount of interest, projects underway, people relocating, construction across the state, and I see it going for a long while.
I don't want to talk a lot about HB2. I think we've all talked it to death to some degree on this program and others, but do you feel like North Carolina, people don't talk about HB2 much anymore. It's behind us in many circles of conversation when it comes to economic development. Do you get a sense that North Carolina will make up that ground? Yeah,
so North Carolina, incredible brand as a progressive southern state, the kind of place that you want to bring your business from either internationally or throughout the U.S. We took a little bit of a time out with that, and now we're back. And I think that there's a great renewed interest in North Carolina. I think that we're rebounding very well and reestablishing brand.
So how much is left in this expansionary cycle for economic developers?
It's a great question, but I would agree with Aaron. The end doesn't appear to be in sight. It is a little scary if you look at the chart of recessions since 1929. They seem to come about every 7 or 8 years. In 2009, we're 8 years into it. So what does that mean? But business is good. From a site selection perspective, the backlog is good, the inquiries are good. Maybe we get a buy because the recovery has been slower after 2008. I don't know why we get a buy, but for right now, it appears quite good. So,
Mark, you were in South Carolina Commerce Department for a while. You've been around. You know the DNA of the Palmetto State in a lot of ways. Do you worry that South Carolina's got really a lot of mojo, a lot of momentum going, but a lot of it's heavy manufacturing, big ticket items, manufacturing. It's aerospace and automotive.
Right.
That's a pretty high concentration. Does that come back around and bite South Carolina in the rear at some point if you don't diversify, or do you feel like you have?
I think there's plenty of diversity, Chris, and And yes, there's been phenomenal success in aeronautics and automotive, and frankly, most of the automotive in the U.S. has occurred in South Carolina in the last 5 or 6 years, which is pretty interesting. But there are lots of other companies that are growing in technology and other diversified fields. The beauty of a Boeing or a BMW or a Volvo is it enhances the brand of the state, which just doesn't attract automotive or aeronautics. It attracts a lot of things.
Transportation in both states was, you could argue on any given day during the General Assembly sessions, it was education or transportation, or it was transportation and education, or it was infrastructure or somewhere. But transportation, Aaron, transportation in North Carolina is important. It seems like the last governor, Governor McCrory, changed the formula, and Governor Cooper has adopted that to some degree. How critical is it to get this transportation right? And do you think that North Carolina has gotten it mostly right? And where are we headed?
So it's one of the most important things, making sure that we're investing in transportation. So you're right, McCrory, when we took the politics out of deciding where we were going to invest, create a system that really scored projects based on how valuable they were to the state. And then we decided to make the Highway Trust Fund sacrosanct, to stop stealing from it in order to fund other things. And so those two changes have really helped a lot. And then we're looking at new technology, light rail to help connect. And we love how it works in Charlotte. We bring that to the Triangle, and then to make sure that people can move throughout the state.
And isn't there a major project, I'm going to get this wrong, and I should have done my homework on this one. The major, is it a CSX or Norfolk Southern hub that's going down east in North Carolina?
It's in Rocky Mount.
Rocky Mount, thank you.
Yeah, it's in Rocky Mount, and it's a major CSX intermodal.
And will that be, do you feel like that's going to do what it needs to do in eastern North Carolina?
I think it's going to be a great enhancement. Actually, we're working with DOT on a project.
DOT South or North Carolina?
North Carolina, helping them figure out who they might target from a business perspective to get a jump on jobs and economic development. So clearly it's a huge plus, and it appears it will be constructed. Plans are moving quickly, so it's absolutely positive. Operationally, I mean, CSX has some things that they're thinking about and how it will work, but it's going to attract business, and I think a lot of it's going to be manufacturing and distribution.
I think we're going to have to go multimodal, whether it's a rubber-tired transit or it rides on rails, or we're going to enhance our air transportation. I took the train here from Chapel Hill, picked it up in Burlington. It was simple and easy, and so I think
does that work?
It worked great for me.
Taking the train between Charlotte and Raleigh worked pretty well?
Yeah, and then soon there'll be a new station in Hill-Carrboro, part of a higher speed transportation system from Charlotte up to DC. And so I think we have to have an all-of-the-above transportation strategy as well. So
no pun intended, but what could derail a transportation plan in the States? Would it be just money? Would it be politics?
I think it's federal money is a huge part of it, and whether the Trump administration's $1 trillion of investment, what that is, what it will fund, what that means, I think that'll have a big impact.
Mark, 30 seconds.
I think it's a lot of money, whether it's state-based or federal-based. I think it's picking battles. Focusing on projects that really matter, because there are lots of political jurisdictions that want this and that, and decisions have to be made about where that counts the most. Yeah. Because dollars are scarce.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. We're bringing our guest on who might have something to say about transportation and some of those issues. Coming up on our program in the next couple of weeks or so, his name is Dale Jenkins. Dale is the CEO of Medical Mutual Group of North Carolina. It is a group of doctors that have banded together years ago to create a company to do a lot of things. But Dale Jenkins, a longtime leader in North Carolina, will be here. And also Dr. Wayne Holden, President and CEO of Research Triangle Institute, will also return to this program. You know, politics in the South are decidedly different, but here in our region, politics in South Carolina are definitely different. During his public leadership from 1999 to 2003, our guest made several landmark decisions. He led South Carolina to adopt Martin Luther King as an official holiday. He approved Confederate Memorial Day. He also influenced the relocation of the Confederate flag from the top of the Capitol Dome to a pole on Capitol grounds. He established construction of Charleston's new Cooper River Bridge at the time, and made big investments in education through things like the establishment of South Carolina's Education Lottery. We welcome back former South Carolina Governor, the Honorable Jim Hodges. Your Honor, welcome to the program.
Chris, good to see you again.
Thank you, sir, and good to have you back. You know, at the time, I hope you understand how I say this, Your Honor, at the time those decisions and those things that you did were important, but they seem even more important now. Is that the truth? Do you feel like that's how history is playing these?
I think so. I think that we wanted to convey a different image of South Carolina, one that was more progressive, that was on the move. Likewise, we had some significant investments we needed to make in education. We wanted to keep our best and brightest home, and certainly the education lottery has helped keep these very bright kids that were leaving South Carolina home in our state. And we want to invest in preschool education to try to get kids better prepared to start school. So I felt good about those things then, but now I think we really have seen those investments pay off.
Governor, I don't want to get maudlin, but when we look at what happened in Charleston at the Mother Emanuel Church and the tragedy, and with your leadership during your tenure as South Carolina governor, you did in fact get that flag finally off the dome. It was very contentious to do it. I know that. I understand that. But the jagged and the tragic line between there and what's happened now with the flag, with the Confederate memorial history of South Carolina and all that, how do you reflect on where South Carolina is now?
I think we're in a better place than we were. I certainly don't want to suggest that we don't have problems. I think our country is too divided by race now and by different views about on social issues, and that troubles me a great deal. I think too much gasoline has been added to the fire here in politics in our country. And the way that South Carolina resolved the flag issue in the last year and a half or so, I think is reflective of how the country should address some of these significant problems. We have been blessed by resolving that issue. I think people have a different view of South Carolina now because of that, and it's helped us as a state. And I think other states can reflect on that and perhaps address their community problems in a way that helps them to move forward too.
Aaron, question?
Well, I was curious about that. It is a fire, as you described, in terms of conflict in politics right now. Do you think that there's anything that can help bring people back to the center or to put out some of the raging fires on this issue?
I hope so. I mean, I'm troubled by it too, Aaron. I think there is too much gasoline added to the fire in public discourse. People need to speak out. I think they need to try to find solutions on some of the tough issues that face our country. Healthcare is a great example where we seem to be talking across each other rather than working together. But ultimately, we need to change the way in which we select our leaders. I think the districts that we have in North Carolina, South Carolina, around the country are drawn in a way that they're not competitive. And one of the things we know in business that applies to politics as well is that competition is good. Competition of ideas is good. We don't have that happening right now, and we need to change that if we want to have, I think, more productive discourse, but also if we want to have more productive solutions to problems.
I agree with that.
Governor, maybe a slightly different tact and question. You had phenomenal success when you were a governor in South Carolina in economic development. And typically in the South and historically, governors have had a critical role in the development of their states. What kind of role do you see governors in the South having moving forward?
Mark, I think an important role in moving states forward. You know this because you had a great career at Commerce, but one of the blessings of South Carolina, and I think North Carolina by and large as well, was continuity. You know, over a 25, 30-year period, we had governors, regardless of party,
right,
who were devoted to trying to maintain a good pro-business climate, who cared about the port facility that we had, who wanted to invest in education. And that didn't change. And if it's BMW or Boeing or anyone else and they came to South Carolina, they would know that 25 years later, those same philosophies would hold true, and that they understood that a commitment that a South Carolina governor made would be abided by a future governor. I think that's really important. Business people hate uncertainty, and having leadership that provides that sort of certainty in terms of promises and commitments is critical for economic development.
You know, Governor, that's interesting the way you know, I think about, as you talked about the continuity between governors, for literally 100 years, from 1874 to 1975, there wasn't a single Republican governor in South Carolina. And then there was a switch, and it seemed to be flipped. And there were Democrats and Republicans, but mostly Republican governors. And yet the way you described it was there was kind of a handoff of the baton without much droppage. And you look at North Carolina, who's a little contentious when it comes to partisan politics. And let me ask you, with a backdrop of what I just described, how do we get back to this place that Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson tried to show togetherness when it comes? I mean, how would you describe a way to get back to a respectful civil dialogue?
Well, it starts with voters. I think, Chris, one of the things that most disturbs me about this last election is there was not a single instance in which a state elected a senator of a different party than the person they chose for president. 100%. If you voted for Hillary Clinton, then you also voted for a Democratic candidate for Senate, and vice versa with Trump. We do not have enough independence right now in politics. We had this discussion earlier as a group. Despite what we think, most people always vote the same way. And I think the thing that would provide the greatest cleansing of our system that Erskine and Allen talked about would be competition. And that is creating more competitive districts, creating situations where I had in my district people who are rich and poor, black, white, and Latino, where I had to deal with a wide variety of problems, because that provides a perspective that a public official needs to make good public policy. If you have everyone who is alike, if you have homogeneous districts, you're going to have homogeneous policy. And that's not what this country is all about, and it's certainly not what the future is all about for this country that is going to look so different than it did 20 years ago.
Aaron?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And we're looking forward to the new census and the new redrawing of districts. But in the interim, is it possible that education can be the thing that brings us all back together? In North Carolina, we're raising teacher pay even with a diversity of viewpoints on how to fund those kinds of things. Your history is all in early childhood education. Business cares about that. If you were to have us focus on one area of education, where do you think is the most important?
If I were king for a day, and I didn't have to deal with the legislature to get something done, believe it or not, the area I would focus on would be higher education. It's too expensive right now. Access is too difficult for students. So one of the things that I've noticed is there are too many people who started college and didn't finish. And if we did something as simple as moving people to the next degree, taking a person who finished high school and getting a 2-year degree, getting someone who started college and getting them to finish their 2 or their 4-year degree, we would see a dramatic improvement both in our economies and in the opportunities for families. And that's really what we're missing, Aaron, which I think is low-hanging fruit, focusing on moving people to that next level. The skills gap that we have now and that we'll face over the next 20 years is critical for economic development. And the only way we'll address that is by trying to make sure that we improve the skills of the people in our state. And that's the one thing I'd focus on.
That's excellent.
Governor, if you were king for 2 days,
You're getting to my territory right now there, Mark.
just trying to help. If you were king for 2 days after you solved the education problem, let's talk about logistics and transportation and investments there. If we could do exactly what we needed to do, both in North Carolina and South Carolina, what would that be in terms of roads, air, port development, et cetera?
Well, first thing that we should do is not pass a stupid trade bill in Washington. And let me divert the conversation for a second to say that states like North and South Carolina and Georgia that have large port operations and that are trade dependent need to make sure that we do not allow Washington to pass a bad trade bill that inhibits the flow of goods through our port operations. That proximity to ports not only leads to traffic and revenue generation around those ports, but there's a lot of business around places like Wilmington and Charleston and Savannah that would dry up if we had a lousy trade bill passed. But the other piece of that, the logistics part, is heavy new investments in things like multimodal facilities. You all talked about that earlier. Transportation networks that tie into the ports, making sure that we move the throughput of goods through our port facilities occurs faster, which means we've got to have greater investment and God knows more cooperation between our states in areas where they can cooperate. Because what's good for Charlotte, frankly, is good for South Carolina. And what's good for Savannah is good for parts of South Carolina. And I think sometimes we compete a little too much and don't cooperate enough.
Yeah, and I don't want to put you at odds with North Carolina legislators. I do want to ask a question. So South Carolina ports, you brought that up. South Carolina ports, record container volume this year, record for their history. They've gotten money so they can begin the deepening project of the port. Wouldn't it make sense for the Carolinas to really look at mapping out their ports, and I'm talking about Wilmington and Charleston, and saying, okay, maybe we lean into Charleston as being our premier port, and let's do something different with the backbone and the transportation and the Wilmington and maybe Moorhead ports. Do we need to have maybe a more thoughtful policy or process here?
We probably do. I mean, I think trying to make sure that the states are working more closely together helps a great deal. But Chris, I think it's safe to say that in Charlotte, when the Charlotte region is trying to get a new project in that involves some distribution through the port, you better believe they're selling the Charleston port because of the proximity there, and in many cases because the topography better suits some of the transportation that's needed to go through the Charleston port. I mean, I think there's probably more cooperation now than folks understand, because it's an asset. Just like when I was governor in South Carolina, you better believe if we had a German manufacturer looking at the upstate, we were selling the fact that we had a Charlotte airport where they had direct flights. It didn't bother me that it happened to be in North Carolina. What was important to me was that it provided proximity to the fertile economic development ground of the upstate in South Carolina.
Chris, I think one of the real assets of North Carolina in terms of ports is, sure, it's Wilmington, but Governor, it's also Norfolk, Charleston, and Savannah. North Carolina is in the middle of this, and you're going to give your clients choice. And I think that's real power. I'd like to see that promoted even more heavily by North Carolinians.
Now, you're from South Carolina, right, Mark? And you're promoting North Carolina?
We work all over the country, Chris. We work a lot in North Carolina. And
I'm being a little cheeky, but the point is that the regional nature of cooperation is what
has to be there. And
a little co-opetition. You know, there is some competition we're going to have, and that'll make us stronger. But if we can find a few more things to cooperate on, either regionally or like the Charlotte region or state to state, I think that we'll do much better.
So foreign direct investment in the Carolinas, do you feel pretty good about the direction of that? Do you feel good that there's still momentum given how you just described economically and legislatively, all these things?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that both Carolinas, when you look at the per capita investment from foreign companies, we lead the nation. So it has been terrific. I mean, BMW, Michelin, you go through the brands for South Carolina alone, and that has made a huge difference. About 10% of South Carolina's workforce is employed by a subsidiary of a foreign company. So I think it's serious when we hear, discussions about trade wars and some changes that might adversely impact some of our partners like BMW and Michelin. You better believe it gets my attention. As 10% of our workforce is working for those companies.
Sorry to interrupt you. We have about 2 minutes left there.
What else can we do to grow our brand internationally? What else can we do to tell our story about the Carolinas, do you think?
Well, I think it's a good story already, and it's fairly well known. Emphasizing the diversity of the Carolinas. I happen to think when you look at what North Carolina offers, Aaron, up in your region, it's incredible. Quality of life issues we need to emphasize more. And I think reassuring foreign businesses, particularly in countries, that this is a hospitable place for foreign direct investment, and that we do have long-term plans for things like transportation and education improvement. Those are the sort of things that they want to hear.
Well, we have about a minute left, Mark. I'm going to ask just a last question.
Please.
We're pretty close to a last question. So, literally in a minute, Governor. So, where's Nikki Haley headed? What's going to happen to Nikki Haley?
You probably have to ask Nikki Haley that question. I think she certainly had a good last year and a half as governor. The flag issue, resolving that, I think was incredibly helpful to the state and I think to her, and she did a really nice job on that. I'm not sure what her future plans are, whether she wants to be Secretary of State or simply wants to be UN ambassador. That's something I imagine that she's not sure of right now. But clearly she's, particularly on the Republican national scene, she's a major player now, and her brand was enhanced by the last year and a half in our state.
And in about 15 seconds, you are the incoming CEO of McGuire Woods Consulting. This is a good thing?
I hope so.
You feel good about it? You're going to grow
Yes,
that
I
business?
do. I am. We have about 1,200 lawyers in McGuire Woods, and we have about 150 consultants now around the country. So I'll be splitting my time between D.C. and South Carolina, and otherwise on an airplane through the Charlotte airport. It's going to be a really good move.
I can tell. Governor, you're going to do great for him, and you've done great for the South and your home state for so long, but thank you for being on the program, and thanks for the leadership.
Good being with you.
Yes, sir. Good to see you. Mark, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for making the trip from Wake County.
It was an easy move across the state.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Bearings, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.